Okay, then I am going to call to order the school committee meeting of April 21st at 9:30 a.m. in the morning. This is a remote meeting that's being recorded during the COVID-19 district closure. Frida, did we have any public comments that were sent to you in advance?
Nothing. No, nothing.
And we did invite our student representatives, but I don't see them this morning either. They may be back hard at work on their schoolwork today, since yesterday was a day off, but today is a school day. I'm going to just jump right in and get started. I think the first thing that we're going to hear from is the superintendent under our reports on COVID-19 and distance learning, an update on how our students and teachers are doing with that, and what our plans possibly are going forward. Judy, would you like to start with that one?
Sure. I shared with you a document that provided some bullet point updates to the school department actions during the school closure. And I want to just reiterate again how very proud I am of our teachers and students and parents and community members who've been so positive and creative and open to continuous learning. The feedback has been very positive as we move to more structured learning. As it would be the case in any situation that has individual differences in need, some parents would like more structure and more direct digital learning, and some would like less. And what we've tried to do is focus on being very flexible and adaptive to the needs of the families as those change over time. I was on a Zoom conference with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education this morning with lots of other superintendents and some people I think probably from our central office were on it as well. There were over 500 people on. Jen, were you on that?
Yep.
Yeah. So the governor is expected to make an announcement at today's press conference between 12 and 1 related to school closure. The commissioner is recommending school closure for the remainder of the year. Not clear whether the governor is inclined to take that advice, and so they'll try to give us a heads up, but if I know, I will let you know as soon as I hear anything, but we're preparing for a full closure for this school year. The other thing I think that's important to note that was mentioned this morning is that later in the week, the DESE will provide more guidance to districts related to a fall reopening and what the provisions might need to be for that related to social distancing and health. And so they're conferring with public health and medical personnel around that. And so we'll have more information for you later in the week about what school might and could look like when we reopen. We decided to take the planned April break and use it for continued learning since we were just getting started with the routines. And our new last day of school will be Friday, June 19th. Ellen continues to work with Winchester Got Lunch and a number of community partners around continuing to deliver breakfast and lunch to families who need it. That happened, I think, yesterday, Ellen, for this week. The distance learning plan is on our website. The technology use guidelines during distance learning are on our website, provide those for you as well. There's also a special education plan and a 504 plan, and there are more specifics on the website if people would like to look at those. The distance learning looks different from level to level. At the elementary level, even the elementary schools are designating certain blocks of time to avoid overlap in video or audio contacts. Teachers at all grade levels have encouraged families to reach out with questions or concerns. The middle school teams are designating team time and then specialist time, and the high school has a modified block schedule that they're using. I'm hearing positive feedback about all of those. No one plan works perfectly well for everyone, but people are being flexible. We are still considering options for grading for quarters 3, 4, and grade point average for the high school, and we'll communicate that when we know the length of the closure, because that will determine some of our decisions. The main thing that I would like everybody to remember is that all students across the Commonwealth and across the nation are in the same predicament in that the last quarter of the year or the last marking period of the year is generally going to be pass-fail or pass no credit or pass incomplete. So no one will have an advantage over anyone else for that last marking period. It's the same throughout the nation. Each school has tried a variety of unique ways to connect with families in addition to academics, and these have included whole school meetings, sing-alongs, videos, a planned drive-by for seniors on May 1st, mail messages, phone calls. I'm really impressed by the ways that we've tried to keep the spirits up and the connection strong. The high school is considering options for senior graduation and celebrations. When we know more, we will let you know. An abbreviated spring sports session is still planned. However, if we don't return to school, that will be canceled. We will have conversations about fees and return of fees and other issues related to budget later in this meeting. Teachers are meeting regularly to collaborate as grade level teams, as content area teams, and full faculties to plan lessons and share strategies. We are collecting lesson plans and activities in a more formal way than we have in the past, so that in the event a teacher is ill or has a family member who's ill, others can pick up that planned operation. And we can also share resources across schools, particularly at the elementary level. Jen has been working hard to support a variety of low or no cost online training options. We've used the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, Massachusetts Partnerships for Youth, the SEAM Collaborative, and others. A lot of these have been completely free and very high quality. This will continue for the duration of the closure. We're tracking PD through our TeachPoint software, so we'll have a record of who participated. This has been a great opportunity for us to continue to work with our ISFs, which are our daily subs, our ESPs, which are our instructional assistants. And so a lot of them are taking PD, and we are tracking it on our TeachPoint software. The ISS and ESPs continue to work closely to fulfill a number of roles, including supporting small group Zoom sessions, monitoring student homework, providing direct one-to-one support, etc., and have really stepped up, and we continue to monitor that closely. Central office members are collaborating closely in a number of weekly or bi-weekly or daily conference calls with other local schools and districts, regional officials, the department heads in Winchester, district leaders, school leaders, collaboratives, DESE finance, special education, the commissioner, as I was on this morning, EFPBC, which I continue to co-chair remotely, the finance committee, MSBA, special education PAC, and others. So we are keeping the lines of communication very strong and are engaged in a wide variety of collaborative conversations. We're working closely with our special education attorney and our regular labor attorney on a variety of issues related to closures. Lori is in very constant contact with our attorney to make sure that everyone understands their rights and responsibilities during the closure, especially as related to a number of the emergency legislative actions that were taken both at the federal and the state level. We are still registering and placing in classes for next fall. We fully expect to be in operation in the fall and encourage anyone who has not yet registered for kindergarten or first grade to do so. If you contact the registrar via our website, she'll be sure to get back to you, and we'll do as much registration as possible remotely. If the closure is extended, we'll have to negotiate new MOAs, and Zena is prepared to do that with Lori, and we'll come back to you. We're already starting to work on what that would look like if we were out for the rest of the year. And we are hiring for known vacancies, although we're holding off on some of the new positions until the FY21 budget numbers are clearer. But for known vacancies for positions we absolutely need, we're starting to make those hires, and all teacher candidates are going to be required to demonstrate skills via digital means. They would normally do a demonstration lesson in person, but we're substituting some kind of a digital performance assessment. So that's the highlights. I'd be happy to answer any questions that anybody.
So it's been a couple weeks. You've started delivering special ed services. How is that going? And has any of the guidance cleared up from the federal level or the state level?
Pam, you want to jump in on that one?
No, Michelle. We're still waiting from Secretary DeVos to actually weigh in on whether or not timelines will be not waived, but temporarily paused. She had a month, and I think that they're saying sometime around April 26th, we should get some guidance there. Each of the building supervisors, special ed supervisors, have been working with their teams to get, develop and share the more individualized remote learning plans. And similarly to what Judy had said, at each level, they look a little bit different: preschool, elementary, middle school, and high school. And so those are being rolled out. There have been some, we've gotten, I basically could ditto what Judy had said. We've had some good feedback, and we've had some concerns about parents not meeting the time outlined in the IEP service delivery grid. So working with the teams to make sure and kind of tweak some of the remote learning plans to see if there's additional ways that we could better support some students. But overall, I think things are going pretty well for some really challenging times.
So just jumping in here, Pam, do you know of any IEP meetings that are happening?
Yes.
And we're continuing to monitor out of
district
district
meetings
services
since March 13th virtually. So, out of district meetings have gone on pretty much without a hitch. We are doing virtual annuals. We are doing virtual 3-year meetings when the testing has been completed. And in some cases, virtual initials when the testing has been completed. And this is all dependent upon parent agreement to go forward with a virtual meeting. Feedback so far has been that they have gone pretty well. And the teams, there was, like anything new, there was a little bit of hesitation to, are we doing it right? But the teams have been reporting that the meetings have gone well. They've been organized. They've been able to share screens. So we're working through some good things.
Michelle, I have a question for Lori, if I can. So Lori, can you just speak to on the hiring front? Are you seeing any changes in terms of number of applicants? Judy described we don't get the opportunity to see them teach in a classroom. So are you changing some thinking about what it is you're looking for from them? Are we able to reach out to references? Are we asking for more references? Are we finding maybe veteran teachers are more or less likely to consider leaving a district? I suppose it really can vary, right? I'm seeing out in Central and Western Mass some districts who rely much more heavily on state aid than we do, or are already looking towards some significant layoffs. So I guess can you color for us at a macro level kind of what hiring looks like, what the talent pool looks like?
So I'd say the talent pool is similar to what we've seen in the past, and certainly the people who are applying in our budget really matches the skill set, because we have all these young people that this is their mean of communication. And the Zooms work very well for the performance task, and depending on what the role is, the tasks are very different. So today, EL is interviewing for a position that over at Lynch, there was a transfer, so there's an opening there. And they're having the teacher create a YouTube of what that would look like, in the classroom as they introduce themselves. So again, depending on the role, it looks very different. So people are being very creative about what they're asking, what they're thinking, and I would say it's kind of a more realistic view of what this person brings to our community, because when we ask people to come into a classroom to do a demonstration lesson, there are so many variables here. This is more in line with where they are and what they are presently doing. So I think it's a good indicator of their strengths. And as far as all the other components of hiring, it's all the same. We are absolutely following up with references. I think most districts are now in the mode of hiring. It kind of before was we're on just, okay, we got to get these MOAs written. Our priorities were different. but now we're all looking at candidates to hire. With that in mind, what Judy said, what you've inferred as well, keeping in mind what the budget may be next year. So being very mindful of our hires, staying within budget, and then which can we hold on. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
You're welcome.
And Judy, I noticed you also gave us the new technology expectations. How are the Zoom conferences going with teachers? Are we finding the new expectations helpful? Do we anticipate that changing if there's a longer closure? Jen, you can weigh in on that too.
Yeah, Jen, please weigh in.
Sure. No, I think that it's, a lot of teachers had already started with many of those pieces. It provided a great opportunity, especially at the elementary and middle school, with the teachers already using Ruler, to kind of return to the charter and talk about, how do we want to feel? How do we want to treat people? What do we need to perform well in this environment? So in many cases, it was seamlessly kind of woven into what they were doing. Luckily as a district in general, we haven't really had the kinds of issues that you read about in the media. So it's been pretty seamless, and the teachers are using Zoom more and more. So it's been very positive.
And we're not having any issues with kids being able to get on or overloading any systems or anything like that.
No, I mean, we have the usual, if a teacher's doing one for the first time, the usual kinks to work out. But, as you probably see through the media every single week, Zoom is tightening more and more things. And as we experience, as we're using it too. So that's been helpful with keeping everyone safe.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else? Questions on anything that we've heard so far? Okay. Before we move on then to the Lynch update, I noticed that Caroline, one of our student reps, has joined us. Caroline, you're welcome to just listen in, or if you had anything that you'd like to share with us about the student experience and the high schoolers, we'd love to hear from you.
Hi. Sorry, it took me a second to get on. Evan's in a class right now. We have classes usually start around like 9:20, but usually for me, I have like one a day or like a couple a week. So it's not really that demanding. Like I didn't have one this morning, so I could make this. Not too much is going on. We haven't gotten an email from Mahoney that we're not going back. People are like saying that there are rumors and stuff. Not sure. Obviously, we didn't have school yesterday because it's Patriots Day, but we have regular school all this week, although it was supposed to be April break, which I don't think there are any complaints about. Yeah, not much going on. No issues with Zoom or anything. Teachers are, I feel like, adapting really well to that, and I think students, it's really easy for them to get on, at least in my experience.
It's good to hear. Does anybody have any questions for Caroline? Okay, great. Caroline, if you feel like you need to jump in or need to ask anything along the way, please just let us know, but we'll continue on with the meeting and you're welcome to stay too. And that brings us to our update on the Lynch School and the MSBA project. That we had an initial kickoff meeting with myself and Dr. Evans, Michael Betancourt, the chair of the select board, Ellen, to get a sense of an overview of what the project was going to look like. And included in your packet, you can see the initial timeline that came from the MSBA, and then sort of a more detailed summary of that timeline that came out of the kickoff meeting. Dr. Evans, would you like to up to date with where EFPBC is on this project and what we can expect as the school committee of our responsibilities in this going forward?
Sure. So I'm expecting that your representative for facilities, Chris Nixon, Ellen and I are going to spend a lot of time together in the coming weeks remotely, filling out and completing some of the documentation that's required to be submitted, particularly by June 30th. But then some other that is longer and more detailed that we need to work on through September. So I've provided the two documents that Michelle referenced. The document that I'd like you to look at is the kickoff meeting summary document, just so you can keep up to date with what is happening in terms of required documentation. The initial funding is not in jeopardy, or at least we've not been notified that it's in jeopardy. They're proceeding with approval of projects in terms of moving from feasibility to the next phase. They recently had a board meeting. And so while there may be some long-term implications of a slowdown in the economy for funding, right now they're encouraging us to move forward with the project. So the first document that we needed to submit was initial compliance certification that's due May 1st. That's already been completed and sent in. I have drafted a school committee, building committee form that needs to be sent. There are some positions on the school building committee form that are not the same as the EFPBC, but there's some overlap. We discussed it at the EFPBC, where I gave them an overview of where we are in terms of the kickoff and the plan for the timeline. And so I'm going to finalize the names for the school building committee and submit that by June 1st. There's an educational profile questionnaire. This is something that probably we should discuss at an upcoming school committee meeting once we have a draft. Talks about what our mission and vision is in terms of what we want the school to be and accomplish. And so it talks about current programs and offerings. This will be discussed with school committee and with EFPBC. And then come the two forms that I'm most concerned about, the online enrollment projection and the enrollment certification. The first one has some historical data, town building information, which will work with the building department to get grade configuration, and then also an enrollment certification where they really kind of narrow down the design option for enrollment, and the MSBA weighs in. The thing that is going to make the enrollment projection and numbers more complicated, obviously, continues to be the large number of building projects that are in process in town. When I spoke with the town manager, and Michelle knows this from housing meeting, that both the River Street and Cambridge Street projects are expected to move forward at a good clip. And now the CVS property has moved in, from a hold status and moving towards construction of some residential units there as well. So with those three being so cheap for folks now, with interest rates being low, the main concern is obviously going to be how quickly can the construction happen, and will that be slowed by lack of materials, particularly from overseas. But we in the next 3 months need to finalize our enrollment projections based on our best guess. And certainly by the time, Lynch is built, all of these projects and more will be completed. And so that is the getting as much documentation about the status of these projects is important. So I'm going to pause there because those are the main reports, and then I'll talk about the rest of them. But let me take questions on anything related to what I've just said. I think Karen had a question. Yeah.
Very simple. So you had just mentioned River Street and CVS, and what was the third one?
Cambridge Street. It had been in litigation for many years.
Okay. All right.
It's across from Whole Foods. Quite a large number of units there. I was surprised.
Oh yeah.
That's a VO. I think it's the VO property.
We've been walking near there, so yes, I know that area.
Yeah. 90 units, Judy?
Something like that, yeah.
I got two
Anyone
things
else,
if I
Chris?
can, Michelle.
Okay.
You hear me okay?
Yep.
So Judy, I'd like to circle back and talk about the school building committee and then about the enrollment information you have to pull together for the MSBA. Our practice in the past was to get the MSBA to agree to let the EFPBC serve as the school building committee. You're right, it doesn't line up exactly, but there's a lot of expertise around the table, especially at this round, compared to some of the other projects. So can you talk about, when you said you're going to get names for the school building committee, I think by May 1st, tell us more about what that means. Are you envisioning that there is a separate entity, separate and apart from the EFPBC? Your goal is the EFC talking about submitting the usual waivers so that they can serve in that role?
So the configuration of the most recent round of school building committees is slightly different from the one that was most recently submitted. That would have been for the high school project, and includes more public officials. It includes more procurement officials. It's my expectation that everybody who's currently on EFPBC will be on the building committee, but we'll have some additional non-voting members who will be added. It could be the town manager, and the town manager was on last time, chair of the select board on last time. Don't attend meetings, but are available and are listed. Either Ellen and or Meg as procurement folks need to be listed. And we may need to add another town official, maybe the assistant town manager. So they're sort of for which there isn't a natural fit in the current EFPBC, but then there's kind of a broad category of others. And so I think when we went through, and Zena can speak to this as having been at the EFPBC, I think that there was an acknowledgement that we're going to primarily have the EFPBC be the building committee with some other names added to the list for MSBA purposes who may only attend periodically. Zena, does that seem accurate?
Yeah, that's exactly what everybody agreed to.
So I think it's appropriate for the school committee to understand that and to say that that's okay. In other words, it's a school project, and with so much interest and expertise around the table, I'm certainly happy to know that what the MSBA sees as the school building committee is the EFPBC plus, if you will, those extra officials that are necessary. And then on the enrollment front, just an observation that what was so successful in the past when we worked with the MSBA on the high school, for those who aren't aware, the Winchester High School today is a larger building than what the state initially wanted to fund. Our design enrollment, although it's not as big as we would like, of course, as Caroline is well aware, I believe the design enrollment, we landed at between 45 and 49 more students than what the initial statement was from the MSBA. We were seeking a building, I think, that had 85 or 90 more students in the design capacity. And so I think what really persuaded them was we were able to go back and look and see, well, what was the state offering us on VO and where did we actually land on enrollment at that elementary school? So history certainly is important here. And Judy, you mentioned my name when you began to speak on this issue. I'm certainly happy to help, and I might suggest, since I know he has nothing else to do, if Brian has any time and interest in helping out on the enrollment piece. I think Brian's been scrubbing some enrollment spreadsheets as well. I'd love to be able to roll my sleeves up with Brian and help you on this, particularly if there's some historical stuff. I'm happy to dive deep for you to get some information.
Appreciate that very much. Any other questions before I wrap this up?
Okay.
Form is a very lengthy form that Ellen will work with and has been working with Pete on. Also, Chris and Brian could weigh in on that as well from a capital planning point of view. We have the ability to earn reimbursement and incentive points through this, so we want them thoroughly. Our town meeting has been moved to June 8th. We still have a warrant article to approve the funding for the feasibility study at town meeting. That vote, if it's positive in June, will be certified and sent to MSBA has to be certified by the end of this year, December 28th. And then we move into the feasibility study agreement, owners, project manager, and design selection after that. So Ellen and I are really focused primarily on the form completion and discussions through the end of September in this phase, and then we will move forward from there. But we had a very collaborative meeting. Happy to see the town represented. Jerry Nardone, who's the co-chair of the now the school building committee, and the EFPBC was present, as well as a couple of folks from MSBA. So I think we're in good shape. We are moving ahead and trying to be as thoughtful and thorough as possible.
Any other questions?
May I ask a question?
Sure.
So one of the things that sort of is on the later time frame of this, which is the certification of the local vote and then moving on to designer selection, what is, for me, on the school committee, one of my highest priorities is the local vote on the feasibility study. Whether, and I ask this question every time, so I'm going to continue to ask it each time, whether we vote it in June or in November at town meeting, is there any advantage, or is the gatekeeping of the certification of local vote on 12/28, would either way that portion of the project be halted until 12/28 and then we would move on? Or do we get any advantage by getting it done sooner as far as designer selection, feasibility study agreement? Is there some advantage to getting it done sooner? Or do we have to basically a hard stop until 12/28 and then we could resume either way?
Ellen, you want to jump in on this one around OPM and design selection? I think there are two potential board meetings at which it could be discussed, MSBA board meetings. The first one doesn't happen until the December board meeting in any case, so there's no, even if it were approved in June, there are other things obviously we can do in terms of getting ready, but the OPM and design selection meeting can happen at the earliest in December. So Ellen, you want to jump in?
That's my understanding, because we still need to have the capital plan and maintenance and capital plan done, which is due the end of September. So I think that regardless of when the vote happens, the earliest that we could get to a board meeting with everything completed, because it's not just local vote, it's everything, and that they've reviewed everything, would be right around December.
Okay, so that's reassuring that we have the flexibility of either summer town meeting or fall town meeting. Although obviously the plan is still to go ahead with spring/summer town meeting. Currently, just want to understand that. And my apologies, but I'm going to keep on asking about this because to me, this is one of the important things that we need to have on our radar. So thank you for also having it on your radar.
Absolutely.
Any other questions about this process?
Judy, did you want to, or were you going to speak to the timeline?
Under the for the kickoff meeting, they really stopped at the OPM design selection and didn't give us any further information around the schematic. Then the next sort of modules, the schematic design and the detailed design and construction. And so that's really where we left off at our kickoff meeting. So that's really where our focus has been. They didn't give us any dates or more specific. I think it's really dependent on whether we're able to get to that point in the feasibility study phase, and then we'll see where we land for the rest of the dates. So I don't have any updates for any of the other phases in terms of timeline.
One of the things I'd like to volunteer my time on, Judy, to work with you and Ellen, is to take that document that you've started and kind of turn it into what I'd call a schedule of deliverables that kind of shows key, and your document begins to do this. There are some kind of, and then there are actually key documents that need to be presented. And so there are responsibilities along the line among different organizations, who's responsible for what. And I think that this is a start towards that, but I'd be happy to help you develop something like that. So for instance, just the OPM piece is pretty important. Before you get to selecting an OPM, you got to go through a selection process, right? There's an interview, there's an evaluation criteria, and then you got to publish that. So it's kind of about finding that vote, finding that deadline to select an OPM, and then kind of working backwards. What are the things that an organization needs to do, and how are we prepared for that. Same is true for, hiring the AE team on the design side. This is a good start.
Sure, no, that sounds great. We may want to circle back with MSBA because they've now broken some of the feasibility study, the standard funding agreement, 3 separate votes on that, different exhibits that they're looking for, total budget, scope, enrollment, and reimbursement rate. All of those get separate kind of considerations. And so I think that getting their, what are their restrictions in terms of their board meeting votes and when those can happen will really help inform our process. What I would also recommend, if anyone's really interested, there's lots of information on the DESE website that highlights kind of the process in each module. And once we get, kind of past this initial work in the next month on enrollment certification, educational profile, et cetera, then we can start digging into kind of a look ahead for some of the other modules as well, and that'll help inform to be sure that we understand what the MSBA's restrictions are on which steps need to be followed for what part of the funding agreement before we move forward for anything. So yeah, Chris, thank you for volunteering. This is obviously a process that changes every time you do it, and we want to be sure that we don't inadvertently miss anything on the list, but their communication has been pretty good. Our project manager has been on top of things, and so I think we're poised to have a great project, and we want to make sure that everyone's voice is heard so that key decisions that are made about the size of the school, the grade configuration, the location, all of those things that the Lynch community especially can weigh in on.
Can I ask something?
Yep.
Sure.
Judy, what's Meg White's title again?
Meg White is project manager for the town,
Right.
Procurement. So she
Right.
needs to be
So
on.
I think the her project management stuff is legally required anyway for this type of project, and I think she will be the one who's allowed to do those kinds of timelines that Chris is talking about. So I think the building committee has the expertise to fill in those timelines because she creates for us those schedules and those breakdowns of the tasks.
Yeah, I think
that's a legal thing.
Yeah, no, I think right in that advertising and making sure that things get up. But Ellen has the same certification, so Ellen can help as well. I'm recommending that Ellen be put on as a non-voting member of the building committee, just to be sure that if Meg can't be there, there's always a procurement person who's on board as well. And I think Chris is right. A lot of these decisions about owner's project manager design selection, people are surprised that the MSBA controls it and has such a strong voice in the selection. But there are a lot of pieces of it that we do and that are not done by MSBA. And so understanding, what boards are involved and who takes votes and all of that kind of outlining and planning piece is going to be a heavy in the next phase of this feasibility.
I would just add too, Judy, that school committee, certainly with your input, but the school committee votes the space program for major school building projects. And so that's not something that Meg White's going to put on a timeline. Meg she almost is the engineering and planning department. She's a jack of so many trades and is just so knowledgeable and capable. But at the end of the day, Meg's really about project execution. So as I've said to the committee before, if design is problem solving, programming is problem seeking. So this school committee with our leadership team is the one that needs to say the new Lynch. And then it's really it's the design team with the EFPBC and the architects that kind of figure out how those pieces come together and how the building design evolves, if you will. But there's some strategic programming discussions that the school committee has to have with the superintendent. And those are the kinds of things that aren't in this initial document, but certainly we would expect to be moving.
Right, that's the fun part.
Yeah.
Can I just follow up? Chris is saying that it's a school committee decision, and it seems to me that this is a administrative level. superintendent role to discuss what's educationally appropriate for an elementary school. I'm confused about the role of school committee and the superintendent in that regard.
The school committee always votes the space program.
Yeah. So I think what Chris is saying is, if you look on your list, the educational profile questionnaire, before I submit that, school committee needs to weigh in and be sure that whatever we're putting in that questionnaire accurately reflects what the school committee sees as the educational mission and vision for this elementary school. How do we feel about the preschool being there? How do we feel about special spaces and collaborative spaces for teachers? And how green do we want it to be? How sustainable do we want it to be? And how much is that part of our program and what we're our core values? And so the whole educational program piece, we did that in a very small scale when we were doing the addition on McCall before we selected the architect. And we brought the whole leadership team and the school committee in, and they led us through some exercises, and I think that was really helpful. So you get kind of two bites at this. One is when you're preliminarily saying, what do we want the building to look like, and how are the educational program needs going to define the space needs? And then once you get an architect on board, meeting again to sort of look at the design itself and how that realizes your vision. Does that make sense, Chris?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I would say that, particularly in the Winchester High School project, we made an effort to say, what kinds of spaces would we like to have today that we don't have? And so that led conversations like breakout spaces for small groups of students outside the traditional classroom. We talked about the black box theaters and so forth. So at the end of the programming stage, Zena, you literally have, I mean, it's not a very pretty or aesthetic document. It's really just a spreadsheet, but it says this many classrooms, but this many, all these other kinds of spaces. And that's really the roadmap for the architecture and engineering team to say, these are all the pieces that are important to Winchester. Now we got to figure out how they all relate to one another. How do we take these building blocks and kind of develop a building? But you got to have that roadmap, or else you may find that you've designed a building and then something's literally missing. So those are the conversations we have at a very abstract level that drive the space program.
I thought you were meaning more detailed than that, so I understand now. Thank you.
Sure, happy to do it.
You and I should also just plan out which pieces are going to be reported on to the school committee for future meetings, and just get those on a schedule so people know when to expect them, those discussions to come up.
Sure, sounds good.
Any other questions about Lynch? Okay, and speaking of space program needs and enrollment, I think that's a good segue into our discussion about pre-K enrollment for next year and what we can expect going forward. I know we've had students this year still enrolling in our classes, but what do we have looking forward for this year and next year too, Dr. Evans?
So one of the things that I wanted to give you an update on from a previous meeting was pre-K to 5 enrollment projections and space updates. And so the document that I shared in the folder is updated with, these are from grade 1 up. These are the students who are currently sitting in seats, except in grade 1 we have the space provided for a few additional students who generally join us between K and 1. The biggest unknown that we have is kindergarten, continues to be kindergarten. During the closure, as you might expect, kindergarten registration really has slowed down significantly. A lot of K parents wait for that parent-to-parent meeting to hear more about what is kindergarten going to be like. Some of them are on the fence about whether they want their children to attend kindergarten or wait for a year. In a time of uncertainty, I expect that more will wait a year to enroll their young children if they can. And so I had originally projected, this year we have about 341 or 2 students in kindergarten. I had originally projected that we'd have about 330. I'm decreasing that a bit to 310 it's really unknown. We have about 310 students who are on the list who we expect to come, but we're trying to close the circle to see whether they will in fact be coming. So it looks like at every school except for Lynch we'll have 3 sections of kindergarten, and then at Lynch we'll have 4. Sometimes we get surprised in the summer and we get a slew of kids enrolling and we're required to add another section. That's always the thing that keeps me up at night, because at some schools I have no additional classrooms. And so you can see at the bottom that what we're looking for is 109 sections. Lynch is going up 1 section at 26. We're going to hold Lincoln at 22. However, that pushes a couple of the grade levels up against the school committee guidelines, and doesn't leave any room for extra kids. So when you look at the numbers in grades 2, 3, 4, and 5, those are based off of the April 1st kids now sitting in those seats if they all stay and they move up. And while there are none that are averaging 22, you know that there are some individual classrooms that could be 22 or 23 based on need, based on groupings, based on services, et cetera. And so I ran these numbers by the principals. The Lincoln principal said she might shift the 4th section that's listed in grade 2 to grade 1 or grade 3, depending on the profile of the students who are currently in those classrooms and which one really needed the additional support. And so the overall sections, I think, are pretty clear, but it's just a question of whether there'll be a shift, from one grade level to the next. Doesn't have a budget impact. So I just kind of wanted your feedback on this and have any questions that you might have related to enrollment. Obviously, we need to carry a number in the budget. Ellen, we're carrying 109 or 110 in the budget? 110? Yeah, we're carrying 110 in the budget. This is 109. Thanks, Ellen. This is 109 right now, but you can see that if I had rooms at Lincoln, that I would add 1 or 2 teachers, and I have no rooms. And so we're really pressing up against it. Also, one of the first grades at Lincoln is a very small classroom and can't really have more than, say, 14 or 15 kids in it. And so was converted from an old reading room. So questions, comments, concerns?
I just have one, Judy. So given that others may see this document, down there at the bottom, your blue line says totals June 1st. So these are numbers you're projecting for September, or is there some magic to June 1st?
No, I didn't notice that, Chris. Thank you. If you look at the top of the sheet, it says April 2020. This is my April 2020 update to school committee. I must have done it on June 1st in a previous incarnation of this same worksheet. So you can just delete that.
These are in other words, the blue is a projection, not to June 1st, it's to September.
No, that's a September projection as of April. Yeah. Brian.
So it appears from this that grades 1 in Lincoln, Lynch, and Morocco are all anticipated to be above our target. But at the same time, it also appears that none of the classes in the entire district are above sort of our action level of where we would absolutely, go out of our way to get another teacher. That's sort of 10% over.
Right.
But at the same time, I did just hear you say, and I appreciate that, first of all, a 60-child kindergarten is right at that target as well, but it's not over the action limit. But some of those classes may end up being over. If you have one class that can only be 15 or 14, then the other ones would have to necessarily be larger to make that work. So my question really is twofold. One, am I correct that there are no available classes in Lincoln or Lynch? And as a follow-up to that, if we do need to expand at Lincoln or Lynch, what are our options if it turns out that Lincoln necessitates a 23 student kindergarten and we as a district feel that's not appropriate? What are our options both there and at Lynch?
Sure, that's 2 good questions. So one thing I want to draw your attention to, it says our projection for grade 1 is 363 students. That's based on our historical current K plus the grade 1 influx that we get of about 10%. that may or may not materialize. And so grade 1 is still an estimate and K is still an estimate.
Got it.
We are out of classrooms at Lynch. We will need to go to at least 26 classrooms at Lynch. There are no vacant classrooms at Lynch. So we're looking at a room that is currently used for EL services. That's sort of a stadium room. You may be familiar with it. That maybe we may be able to make a classroom from that room and move EL services elsewhere. That's really our only option at Lynch beyond taking another pre-K classroom out of Lynch and moving that pre-K classroom to another school. Ambrose and VO could take 1 or 2 classes. Ambrose currently has district-wide specialists working in the modular spaces. Ambrose could take a pre-K. I hate moving 1 pre-K. We could move a pre-K to VO and have 3 pre-Ks there. Ambrose and VO are in the wrong spot. Many of our pre-K students live in Lynch or Morocco districts, and now we have to transport them or have their parents transport them all the way across town. So that, that's a tough decision to make. So Lynch is we're really seeking some more firm numbers before we make a final decision, but it looks like we're probably going to start to take that EL classroom. The other option is we could take art or music and move it to a CART, have it classroom based. Prefer not to do that for obvious reasons. Those are both strong programs. At Lincoln, there is still a music room that could be moved back to the stage. That was not the best space for teaching. We'd prefer not to do that, but we could do that as well. So if we add any classrooms at Lincoln, we will have to push music back to the stage. That would be the next step. And then at Lynch, we'd have to likely pull a pre-K classroom if we added a 27th section. Morocco also has been the most volatile of our enrollment up and down for the last few years. Kind of, you look at 84, which is tied for our highest number of first graders at Morocco. So a small kindergarten would serve us well until we can get Lynch rebuilt, because then those kids moving forward are a smaller group and don't bump into the need for 4 sections. But we have a lot of mid-60s class sizes that typically we would add another section. And at Lincoln, we're out of space. There are no specialized programs at Lincoln we can move. The other option for any school except Lincoln is to move a specialized program to a different location, which is also incredibly disruptive, which I would hate to do. And Pam knows how difficult it is to transition kids who are part of a community and now they're uprooted. They're our most at-risk students. So while our overall number of elementary students is not significantly higher, it's just where they are and where the bubbles are that dictate how many classroom sections we'll need. And really, we would have, if we had unlimited space, have moved students. The other question that someone's going to bring up is, where are we on Parkhurst? So the elevator project is starting this week. They're starting the petitions and they're moving in. How soon could we put kids there? If we had an absolute, unexpected influx of many students, we could make it work for the fall at Parkhurst to move some sections there. I would prefer not to. We probably won't be done with the elevator project, but if it's done by the fall, we could conceivably move in that direction or partway through the year if we had to. So we're looking at all contingencies, and I've been having these conversations with principals and we'll continue to have them. We had a number of new enrollments for the elementary level during the year. They didn't go to the right places. The other choice that school committee is going to have to make is, what are we going to do to incentivize open enrollment where there are open seats, and try to move people into some of the schools which have available space. But the problem is those students are all in families and their siblings want to go. Sometimes there's no room for the siblings. And so it's not always an exact science. So that's where we kind of landed. I hope that answers your questions.
That was immensely helpful, the whole discussion. Thank you.
Sure.
Judy, how firm are we on the kindergarten numbers? Is there any additional outreach that we need to do? It seems much lower than previous years, and obviously given world events, we can imagine that might contribute to it, but are there any additional communication things that we want to do to reach out to parents because they may not realize they can register with the district being closed?
So we have sent communication to everyone we know who's a potential student. The information we get from the town census gives us ages and addresses only. So we do mailings to those families. If the students are siblings of current students, then we can call, and we have called, and I've asked our clerical staff members at each of the elementary schools to do another outreach, either a mailing or a call. We also have communicated with all of the preschools in town, although some of our students don't go to preschool in town, they go to preschools in other towns where their parents might work. So my fear is that there are families who are new to Winchester, don't know that they have to register. We have a large number of English as a second language families, and reaching all of those families is sometimes difficult. And so this is a little lower than we have been, but it is historically until May 1st, some people just really put it off, even though we give lots of deadlines, we try to start early. So, the numbers are not going down at the other grade levels, which leads me to think that they wouldn't go down that much at the kindergarten level either. But short of outreach to preschools, sending out more mailings, physically calling the families who haven't registered yet and saying, are you coming or not coming? Again, I'm open to suggestions on how we might get the word out.
Just a question, Judy, to kind of follow up on Michelle's question. So given what you've seen in the census and given what you know about siblings who are in the district, can you just describe how does that 310 number compare to what our understanding is right now on age eligible kindergartners?
So we have not heard from a large, so it's about, typically the census only reflects 2/3 of the kids who come. It's not, there are other kids who come who were not on the census. In the sense, and there are kids on the census who've moved or don't end up coming. So when I look at the list of students who were on the census who we've contacted, the number of parents who said their children are not coming is actually lower than in some previous years. And so I don't know that the census continues to be a good match for us because it doesn't tell us the whole story. Particularly people who are new to town, who might be second language learners, are not going to town hall and registering for the census. And so we don't necessarily have a list of all of the students. The majority of students we know about because they're either in our preschool or they're siblings of current students. And a lot of those were not on the census. And so there's not a great match. It's not a good predictor. So I don't, what I'm mainly concerned about is, are there families who are going to hold their kids who told us they were coming? And are we going to be forced to make a decision to have 2 sections of kindergarten out of school instead of 3? Because some of these numbers could be quite low. I'd like to hold the numbers at 3. We've never had only 2. And so it's, the tool with the census is not as useful as it might be.
Do we reach out to associations like the Chinese Association or Network for Social Justice, or maybe through the library?
Yeah, I mean, we can certainly try to get the word out as much as possible. I think that there are still people moving to town, surprisingly. There were plenty of folks registering during the break. Likewise, there may be some people leaving town. And so there'll be some movement. And so library, the Chinese Association, and Network for Social Justice, I think all of those things will be helpful ways for us to get the word out. We really just want to get firmer numbers, but it's not going to change much. I don't think we're going to go to 2 sections. I think in the end, we'll have either 300 students or 340 students and not add a section, except perhaps at Lynch. Lynch is the big wild card because we're absolutely out of space. And so I'll have to move a preschool classroom if that's the case. Anything else on enrollment? So we are having conversations with middle school and high school. Ellen's checking with the middle school principal around possible vocational and private school placements. So Dennis is finalizing his enrollment choices for classes for next year. Jen and I have a meeting with Dennis to talk about what classes might not run based on signups or capacity. And so we'll have to make some hard choices, as we do every year, around how many class sections we have. In an ideal world, we'd hire the right number of teachers to match every child's requests. Especially in a tough budget year coming up, that's going to be even more concerning. So we're going to have to take a very hard look at both requests and likely schedules and see where that lines up.
Okay.
Okay.
Anything else on enrollment? Okay. I'd like to move on to budgets, but what actually flop what's on the agenda and talk about the FY21 budget update, and then come back to the FY20 financial. The FinCom met last Monday evening to respond to our budget. We had put they took a unanimous vote, as I indicated to the board, to us at a 2.77% increase for FY21. Just to remind you, our initial request was a 3.74% increase. The town manager has since come back and has been reviewing and re-preparing the town budget, and has come back and suggested a 3% increase for the schools. On the town side, Lisa Long has concerns about the decrease in the state and the town revenue. Her projections have been anywhere from 10 to 20% on both the state and the town side of a decrease in revenues. There are some increased expenses on the town side for a number of reasons. The select board and town manager and FinCom still need to review the town budget to have a better idea of where they stand. We certainly want to be good stewards of the resources that the town has and that we're given. But right now, I forwarded you FinCom's report on our budget and their recommendations. But right now, I would suggest on our FY21 budget that we actually hold for a bit before we make any decisions until we get a firmer understanding of what's happening on the town side and with town and state revenues. Dr. Evans, did you want to add anything to that before we jump into a discussion?
So as you might imagine, on the DESE call with the commissioner and superintendents this morning, there was a lot of conversation about strategies related to the Student Opportunity Act funding, the FY21 budget, the FY20 budget. And one of the recommendations that they made was to retain as many of the dollars associated with grants for an additional year as possible, to spend down your appropriated money and to retain grants, because it's unusual that they would allow us to do that for the federal grants, and they are allowing us to do that. They also pointed out that there could be some additional stimulus money or other funding coming to education to deal with the additional costs associated with the closures, with remediation, with transportation, should we need to go into double sessions or triple sessions next year, et cetera. So they're putting together some more information. I know Ellen has stayed really close to it, and Pam, both have had extensive conversations with the DESE related to special education funding, grant funding. Ellen has been working with the collaborative around saving on special education transportation, particularly during the closure, et cetera. So, so I guess what I would say is my recommendation is similar to Michelle's, that it's likely we'll have to make a reduction from our original proposal to meet the projected revenue, but that this is really a multi-year planning process, that any decisions we make on retained funds for FY20 will impact our ability to meet our targets for FY21 and FY22. And you might remember that when we made a lot of promises in relation to what our planned budget was with override funds, we talked about that lasting for 2 or 3 years. hoping it would be 3, thinking it would be 2. We did get a substantial increase in Chapter 70, and we will have a projected increase in circuit breaker. But whether all those come to fruition is still kind of up in the air. And so I think it's good to be conservative, but not jump into the deep end of the pool to make drastic cuts before we know actually what our revenue is going to be. So we're holding off on hiring some of the new positions, but the ones that are sort of enrollment or safety related, we're going to go ahead and hire. And if we have to make cuts, we'll make cuts somewhere else. We need the additional half-time nurse. We need the additional counselor, particularly with kids coming back to the high school who have been traumatized by and continue to be traumatized by this pandemic. And so but some of the additional positions we're holding off on, and we'll need to have discussions. The kindergarten aides going to full-time, the third elementary counselor, the dean of students, et cetera. All of these are needed and deferred positions, and but we have to be realistic about what the limited funding might be. And so I think my recommendation would be hold off. Understand that it's always a negotiation between the finance committee, the select board, and the school committee, trying to match available revenues to what the projected needs will be on both sides. There are still some collective bargaining agreements on the town side that need to, come to fruition and make sure that we understand the implications for health insurance. There's pieces of the town budget that are also related to the school department. And so Ellen and Lisa and I will continue to have conversations. We'll keep you updated. But the memo that Ellen and I have presented around, should we have a positive variance on the FY20 budget, how do we address that so that we can leverage the funding to support planning for FY21 and 22? I think that discussion is the most important one today.
So any questions on FY21?
Can I just make a quick comment, a two-part comment. One is that if you look at the draft document that FinCom prepared, I just want to point out there are at least some typos of substance. So I can let people know what those typos are because I've spoken with FinCom. But the bottom line of their vote, which is 2.77% or $527,000 less than our ask, is what they voted. So the rest of it, just keep in mind it's still a draft document and there are typos. I just wanted to also point out that as Judy alluded to, I believe there continue to be discussions with FinCom, school committee, select board, town management, school management, as far as budget negotiation, budget discussions moving forward, and those meetings are still taking place. So this is not sort of the end, but continuing. So I just wanted to point that out.
So I guess the other thing, Michelle, before we jump into FY20 is, that every position that we ask for that has a personnel part, and they're almost all personnel, is a real person on the other end. Decisions being made and considerations about positions being reduced often have a ripple effect through our staff members in terms of morale and in terms of people deciding to go to other districts or pursuing other options. And so I just want to be sensitive to that before we go into a lot of detail about why this and not that. The other thing that's also very difficult is that finance committees are asked to make recommendations based on projections of revenue, and they're not really asked to make value judgments about what they would cut. And it's easy for them to say, let's just not add any new people. But the reality of school districts is, whether you give us the money or not, there are some new people we're going to add, and we're going to make other choices that are hard choices related to that are going to have an impact on other people. Similarly, when we cut existing positions, it really has a large ripple effect because of our union contracts. So often seniority results in 2 cuts when you thought it was going to be 1 cut. So all of those things, I think, make it imperative that we make decisions in a timely fashion, but that we don't jump into the range of speculation or prediction before we need to.
Can I chime in as well, Michelle, and just offer, oh, I'm sorry, Zena was raising her hand.
It's okay. Go ahead, Chris. I can go after Chris.
So I want to strongly suggest that when the time comes to revisit this with the finance committee, we need to roll the clock back a little bit. I think it's a problem that we start the comparison at FY18 because of all-day kindergarten. I want to remind the committee that the superintendent's proposed budget for FY18 was actually 47,418. The reason we see that large number, if you remember, we got bridge funding from town meeting. It was over $500,000. And we were careful to say at the time, not only how much we needed it sort of as a one-time injection of funds, but we actually waved a yellow flag and said, let's not forget moving forward that whenever we go back and we look at what FY18 is, and you see I'm putting that in air quotes, that there's kind of a base FY18 budget, and then there's this other funding that's kind of a one-time unique animal. So it appears from the chart that Michelle has shared with us that what we're looking at for FY18 actual includes that bridge funding. I think Brian has made an excellent point in previous meetings that the request that we've made moving forward in the budget we voted is historically low. And I think he's right. But I think to really get a picture of that, one needs to roll back. Let's look at FY16, look at 17, look at what 18 was without all-day kindergarten. You can put that number in there, but let's do it below the line, because I think then we all can get a much sort of fairer, more full picture of what our requests and increases have been. So I just wanted to be careful to throw that out. 47,950 is not the budget that Judy recommended and that we voted with our usual increases. That's all in with all-day kindergarten, and that was a one-time event.
Right, and just to be clear that the following year, our increase in Chapter 70 more than made up for the town's funding of all-day kindergarten. It's in fact been a boon for us in terms of funding. And that decision to fund it for 1 year led to, it paid itself back and then some, so.
Zena?
So I support the suggestion that Michelle and Judy have made of putting this on the back burner until we know more, because prejudging things when they can be a lot worse or a lot better is just going to put us in very awkward positions with potential catastrophic repercussions that we didn't intend, especially with the staff and morale and students and their expectations. So I support that. I also would like to ask Brian if you could follow up with me. I don't know if everybody else agrees. Some of the errors in this memo, because I'm not as familiar with the finance process, I would love to get your feedback on what the mistakes are that impact our decision making in the future. If this is a draft, I don't know when it'll be finalized versus when we need to know things. So I would appreciate that information that you have, Brian.
Right.
Absolutely. I just simply didn't want to go into this document that's not our own and give it more weight than the bottom line, which is what they vote. But I can certainly tell you there's a couple of one major error of substance that I will talk to you offline about. And I don't know when they'll get a final. The reason this is draft is because we asked for it. After they voted, we said we want a copy as soon as you can get us one. And they said, well, we haven't finalized it. They put it in their budget book, and they're like, well, we want one as soon as possible. So they gave us their draft. So I didn't want somebody look at this and get all upset at either us or at FinCom when I am aware and they have told me that there are errors, and I will let you know what they are.
So, Zena, Brian and I both at FinCom, they presented this. And as Brian said, we asked them to share the draft with us so that we could understand sort of their thinking. So this is kind of just for us a window into how they thought about getting us to 2.77. It's not necessarily even, I would say, Brian, you can back me up, even for FinCom, like a firm document. It's just sort of an opportunity for us to get a window into how they were thinking about it. And as Brian said, I think what really matters is the 2.7% increase, and that it was a unanimous vote by FinCom to get to that.
Okay.
So that lets us sort of know that where they were really thinking and that they were all in the same place on that.
Agreed.
That's good to know. Thank you.
Sure. And if nobody has any other questions on any of that, Brian and I will continue to attend the budget advisories with FinCom and the Select Board and Judy and Ellen and Lisa, so that we can keep you guys up to date on what's happening and what the changes that we see coming. Because as Judy mentioned, there are grants available new every day. There's more information from the state that comes to us. It changes rapidly. So I think the budget advisories that we've been having to all be on the same page have been really helpful to keep in touch with that information also. But that leads us into a discussion of our FY20 budget and some of the options that Dr. Evans was talking about ways that we can work with the remaining money in our budget from this year.
Sure. So I'm going to give you the highlights, and then Ellen can jump in and Ellen can answer specific questions. So before I talk about the available remaining budget projected for FY20, I think it's important just to remember that the total amount of money that the district expends during a year has several sources. The majority is appropriation, and then we have state and federal and local grants, and then we have circuit breaker reimbursement. And any of the money that comes in through appropriations has to be spent in the same fiscal year. Some of the state and federal grants have expirations in the summer, but in this year, they're letting us extend any available funds because of the unusual situation with the pandemic. Circuit breaker always must be used within a year after it's been received in the following by the end of the following fiscal year, and is based on what you spent last year. And then there's the other category that is fees that we take in for preschool and transportation and lunch services and so forth. Those are all placed in revolving funds and are available kind of in perpetuity to be used for the purposes for which they were collected. So we don't often sort of take a step back and look at when we're doing budget planning, all of the available sources of revenue and how long we can extend those to help with budget planning for subsequent years. And we haven't been able to do that in the past, mainly because some categories of expenses, like special education expenses, have risen so rapidly and have exceeded our budgeted amounts in a fashion that required us to expend almost all of the money that came in the year that we got it, and we couldn't retain any for subsequent years. So in the last couple of years, and Ellen's now in her third year on the job, we've been able to do some budget planning that has allowed us to end the year with funds, namely circuit breaker funding. As you saw from our initial budget presentation, we were planning to keep a substantial amount from this year's circuit breaker and use it for planning purposes to offset next year's budget. Ellen and I have said that in our previous districts, what we were able to do with budget planning was to take all the circuit breaker money from this year and plan to use it to offset next year's budget. That's the best way to do a budget plan, because then you know with certainty how much you're going to get. We won't know until September how much circuit breaker money we're going to get for next year. Right, Ellen? Right. So that makes it really difficult to project a year in advances, which is when we do our budget, how much circuit breaker we're going to get. So you might remember that we projected very conservatively, and then the circuit breaker coming in this year is higher than we had anticipated. We also had lower than anticipated costs for some special education categories of spending. That's going to allow us to retain some money to be used towards next year's budget. The other piece of available funding is anything that remains primarily as a result of personnel favorable hiring, replacements coming in substantially less than the people they replaced, positions that we didn't fill or were unable to fill for some time, et cetera. And at every March or April time period, we kind of take a look ahead and see how much money we think we're going to have by the end of the year. This year is a very unusual year because we have some parts of our budget that are uncertain, especially not knowing the length of the closure. We don't know, for example, whether we're going to return all spring sports fees because we won't have spring sports, whether we'll pay, and this has to be negotiated, a small portion of the coaches' stipends if we don't have a season, whether we're going to return or not collect a large amount of preschool fees, whether we'll have any impact on transportation and transportation fees, food service, obviously. We're expecting to get some of the money back for the lunches and breakfasts that we're sending out, but there'll be some costs there, et cetera. How long do we carry personnel? So there are sort of some unknowns in the FY20 budget that we'll have to address in the coming weeks. And what we're trying to do is retain as much as possible to offset FY21 and FY22, and to beef up some of our revolving accounts that are fee-based revolving accounts with the look ahead that in the fall, we may run into a deficit if we have a lot of kids who become eligible for free or reduced price lunch and therefore don't pay fees. So there are lots of moving parts to this. So what we tried to do in this memo is kind of outline our options. And what we'd like to do is, if we continue to retain this favorable balance, to try to do a look ahead and in a perfectly legal and appropriate way, pre-purchase some materials, supplies, and equipment necessary for FY21. These might include athletic supplies and materials, uniforms, instructional materials, technology, books, etc. And also we'd like to preserve the circuit breaker and grant funds through journal entries that would use some of the appropriated money and retain the grants and circuit breaker money to be used for FY21 or FY22. And finally, preserving the revolving account. So there are really three slices of the pie. This is not atypical. Every school district does this every year. If you have remaining funds, you pre-purchase, you take things that you can preserve and you preserve. And in that way, it just helps with the following budget year. We try to do this in a really transparent way, but often we don't know until the summer months how much we need because we don't know what's been put aside to pay a bill that then doesn't come to fruition, that we thought we were going to be paying a special education bill, for example, and then that student ends up not attending. We don't often know that until the summer. And so Ellen closes the books in August for the June 30th fiscal year. And we just want to make sure that we have some flexibility and that we're pretty transparent about this, that should we have a positive variance in our budget, that we can do some transfers or journal entries to try to preserve that as much as possible. We also need to decide whether we're going to return anything to the town purposely. One of the things that we've discussed sending to the town, returning to the town for free cash is the salary for the technology director. So you have two options there. You can return that for free cash, or you could use that funding for technology devices or infrastructure and beef up our capacity there should we need to continue distance learning. So lots of choices to be made. We're not asking for you to make specific choices today. We're just trying to alert you to our intentions and take any questions that you have. You have designated Brian Vernalia, who's going to stay really close to this and can report back in 2 weeks at the next school committee meeting. And so this year-end spend down or movement of funds to offset FY21 and 22, I think is prudent. So that's the high level. Ellen, have I forgotten anything or left anything out before we take questions?
No, you hit all of it.
Question.
May I make a comment? I'm happy to see that you're doing this. I think particularly for the revolving accounts in light of the COVID-19 issue that we have right now, we have revolving accounts that are potentially not taking in revenue, but still are expending funds. And there's really good reasons we want to continue paying some of our teachers who are being paid out of for instance, the pre-K revolving fund. But if we're not taking in revenue, we could find ourselves in an unfavorable situation next year. So I think that especially in light of where we are this year, I think this is a very prudent situation, process to take place. So I'm in support of this, but particularly in support of all the revolving funds, where I think that we're still spending money, but we're not bringing anything in.
Can I want to chime in. I'd second that entirely.
I would also add, Judy, you
Yeah,
noted
go ahead.
I was just going to say, Chris, Brian, and in the memo at the bottom of the memo, it indicates that, but certainly Brian wouldn't be making any choices about our FY20 budget without bringing them back to school committee. I just wanted to reaffirm that as well. Go ahead,
Exactly.
Chris.
I had that observation and that question as well, because ultimately when the decisions are made, they will be consequential. So I appreciate kind of the overview, Judy, of the levers that can be pulled, but I think it's important for the school committee to have an awareness and the opportunity to discuss. Can we talk about, so we've talked a little bit about the storm clouds ahead for FY21, but it might be, I know we've talked about this previously, and I've put Pam on the spot about EYP. In my mind, I'm also just thinking about what are the budget risks associated with FY20? What are costs above and beyond what we would typically see because of coronavirus? And so I'm thinking about those kids who are not in school, who typically be receiving services in school. Can I ask Pam, do we know any more now about kind of impact on EYP? And I think of that as it's a summer program. EYP, is it not entirely funded by FY20, or does it jump also into FY21? How does that land between the two?
Can I jump in on that? Any EYP that is that happens between the end of this and the last day of school and June 30th would be FY20. And then once we hit July 1st, all EYP becomes FY21 expenditures.
Okay, so then just maybe that's worth putting a mental Post-it note in terms of Michelle, Brian, and Judy, your continued conversations with FinCom around FY21, right? So you recommended a budget, we voted a budget for 21 that did not contemplate added needs and increased programming for EYP. Not that I can begin to monetize that, but that, in my mind, that's a risk that's out there.
Mm-hmm. I would agree.
Pam, do we know any more today than we did a couple of weeks ago, just about sort of the scope of programming?
No. In fact, if we don't go back, it's going to look entirely different in terms of remote and distance learning for even the summer piece.
Mm-hmm.
I have a meeting on Thursday to actually really start looking at what our typical summer would look like, and then what remote learning summer could potentially look like. There's some interesting offset, Chris, for us to be thinking about. Our typical summer programming talks about recoupment and regression for students who are in day-to-day operations. They're referring to COVID supports and compensatory, as we shouldn't actually be using the same words. And it sounds like a crazy differentiation, but I kind of like it because it helps us kind of think about, here's summer, here's potential COVID compensatory, and what might that look like? And what might we need to be thinking about? And that gets back to Judy's point a little while ago about what might it look like if we went with double shifts or triple shifts, things like that. If we go to remote summer, we potentially need less staff and no transportation, so we have cost saving. When we come back, we could potentially need some additional staff or some additional tutoring or different opportunities for people. And we're back with the transportation. So nothing yet. I have been monitoring requests. We have had some requests for some changes of placement and out of district, kind of what this would look like. I'm anxious about what it's going to look like. If we have remote learning from now until June, how is that then going to play out? And then if our actual physical return date is until September, what else do we need to be thinking about? And I guess to coin one of Jen's phrases, I'd ask everybody to kind of zoom out as we're thinking about this, because it's a nation that has been out of school. And for us in Winchester, what is this going to look like for all of our kids, not just our special ed kids, and what might we need to be thinking about, the ideas of different kind of pseudo boot camps and kind of intense instruction, and what does that play out for union agreements? What does that play out for finances, scheduling, whole host of different problems. So kind of the long and short of it is, no, I don't have any changes, but I'm anxiously waiting for the next couple of decisions to be made to help us kind of figure out what our decisions need to be.
Hey, Pam?
Yep.
Since ESY might not start till after July 1st, has there been any discussion if public school districts are out for the rest of the school year, but then social distancing requirements may change over the summer? Has anybody discussed a hybrid where if school is out, we may still be able to do some in-person services over the summer?
Not yet, Michelle, because we haven't actually heard anything. So, best case scenario is that we are able to do some in-person support. That would be wonderful. Haven't heard anything just yet.
Okay.
So many of our students in the summer are there for kind of social pragmatics or social interaction. And this is the absolute worst situation for those kids, that everything is.
Yeah.
So, I'm more optimistic that we're not going to get suddenly faced with hundreds of millions of dollars in compensatory requests or claims, because everybody is going to be in the same boat, not only in America, but around the world. And all students have been disadvantaged and advantaged in different ways with distance learning. And so it's something that as educators, we will figure out and we will catch kids up. And I just want to remind everybody that it's not a race, and that we will get kids to the finish line of high school graduation or beyond if they have extended services. And we will figure it out together, in that we can't take action out of a sense of fear that it's going to result in large amounts of compensatory service budgets. But we've just got to be aware that this pandemic has had an impact on everybody, but most especially our disadvantaged students and our students with disabilities, and just try to be as kind and patient as possible with each other, because what we don't want to do is operate from a position of fear and concern that is going to limit our options and our ability to be creative in our approach. So
I just wanted to ask, what is, you've mentioned this a couple of times, double shift and triple shift? What does that refer to?
So one of the things that so a couple things. We expect that public health and the governor's office and the DESC, they're going to come out with recommendations that are going to limit social interactions. Schools are social places. Very, very difficult to keep people meeting in small groups of 10 or fewer. Easier for our district because of reasonable class size K-5, not so easy middle school and high school. It's likely to result in school opening in September, not as usual, but with some kind of social distancing guidelines in place. That could involve taking temperatures of students and teachers wearing masks. It could involve students only attending every other day. So half the students are in one day and half on another day. The commissioner has asked us not to move forward on detailed plans for any of this until the DESC and the state come up with some guidelines so that districts approach it in a similar fashion. Some options require us to double or triple our transportation budget, which is, you know, $1 million decision. And other options would have significant impacts on staff members. Particularly, a lot of our staff members don't live in Winchester. If their students are on an every other day schedule and it's not on the same day that they're working, there are childcare issues. So we're not under any illusions that this is going to go away quickly. The other thing that they've talked about is rolling closures. So within a district or a town, if there's a sudden spike in cases before there's a vaccine or a reasonable treatment, that schools, individual schools or towns or districts could close down for rolling periods of several weeks at a time during the school year next year. So we're starting to think as a leadership team about all of these things, but we're waiting for the DESC. They say maybe by the end of the week, they'll have more guidance for us. It has a budget impact, but it has a learning impact as well. But kids can't learn if they're sick, and they can't learn if they're traumatized. And so, you know, we've sort of reprioritized, and we're focused on physical safety, emotional safety, and well-being, and learning of content third. And that's the approach that we'll take.
Go ahead, Zena.
I would also like to see if there, sorry, lost my train of thought. If we need money in the budget to formalize this disaster plan, and I'm going to call COVID a disaster for us. So if there's anything we need to formalize it and to fill in gaps, I would like to know that. So for example, a fully fleshed out document on what will we do next time, and where are the gaps in technology, because I know you said it's an international thing, but a lot of international students actually are more technologically advanced. They have access to more advanced technology. I want to know if we have any of those kinds of gaps and how much it would cost us to formalize this plan or seek additional expertise on these kinds of disasters, if that's anything that we need or you would like us to consider.
Thanks. Yeah, we'll consider that. Appreciate that suggestion.
Zena, are you talking about out of our FY20 budget or for our FY20? Or
I'm open, but given that we're looking at what we can do for FY20 funds that are left over, if that is a need, especially as this extends into next year, I'm open, and it's really within the administration's understanding to let me know what they need. But either or, especially since the July 1st, our new tech director starts. That person, he's going to have a lot of input, and we can have our administration central office people currently in place informing him where they saw gaps in learning or whatnot. There is a lot of disparity and discrepancy in between one family versus another. I've seen it, and so I want to understand better if there is going to be a cost to fix that technology gap, plus to put into place that disaster plan.
Okay, thanks, Zena.
So Michelle, I have another question
Judy, you,
about
had mentioned
budgeting, but it has nothing to do with
140
EYP.
Oh, hold on. Judy, you mentioned the we had for the tech director. And Zena just mentioned he starts July 1st. Is there any opportunity to have him come on earlier on a consulting basis out of that $140,000 salary that we have, or is he just simply unavailable until July 1st?
So there's some opportunity to use some of that funding to hire him to start a little earlier. You know, and Jen can jump in on this. You know, I don't think that the issues that we've had with distance learning have had a lot to do with technology gaps. There are some people who don't have enough robustness in their internet system to access the Zooms as well as we'd like, but we have not turned down anyone who's requested a device. We've given out mobile hotspots to lots of students. Jen, can you see any advantage to bringing him on early, and any major gaps that have been identified in technology as part of distance learning?
No, I think we would have to send out another, I mean, it's a little bit too soon right now, but send out another survey to be able to get some feedback on what it is. I mean, 90-something% of the concerns that we hear about are more managing and juggling people's lives and their own jobs and their kids' Zoom than it is the inability to do anything with technology. So if people are struggling with other things, that data is just not getting to us. So I think we would need to send out another survey to kind of get a handle on what's working and what do people feel like they need more help with. Certainly the data from our teachers, which we just recently gathered, doesn't indicate, we gave some open responses, and almost every single open response wasn't about a need for more help with technology pieces. So we had 2 small areas where people were looking for help that we've addressed, but in general, the questions were more about like managing all the pieces and expectations and what was all of that, rather than anything to do with technology use or even PD that they needed. So we're not seeing technology on the staff side. We continue to give out devices, families' devices go down, or they have found that juggling devices that they thought they could handle at the beginning didn't turn out to be the same. So still giving out devices 3 times a week. I'm at central office giving them out. Certainly the flow has slowed greatly. And so I think that's the only thing that we've heard about, and certainly in some of our, higher needs populations, sometimes that information was slower getting to us, even though we sent out a lot of things. When they actually started working in the classrooms, that's when we were getting good feedback from teachers saying, I've noticed, I think that they're struggling with an internet connection, and so we give a hotspot, or they're juggling devices in this household, so then we'd give a Chromebook. So I think we've kind of closed that net pretty successfully. This is happening in every district everywhere. I'm on the tech director listserv, and everybody's in the same place that, they gave out their surge of devices, and then as issues come up, people are still handing them out. So I would say we're in a pretty normal place, but truthfully, I think we were ahead of the curve with technology on a lot of things. The fact that we were already BYOD 5 to 12 was a huge asset to us as we made this shift. The fact that we were in the G Suite already with people using Google Classroom and Google Docs was pretty seamless for us. The fact that, we pushed so heavily on technology ever since we kind of started our partnership with Powered Up with Wi-Fi, that we've been so heavy on it, that I think our teachers were a lot more prepared. And also just a little shout out to the way we do curriculum too. I think the ability for teachers not to be in a scripted program that they had to do an exact lesson each day made our teachers much more adaptable to moving to this than had we had a very scripted curriculum with resources now kids didn't have access to, or they couldn't get. Our teachers are pretty used to using open sources and using a variety of ways and differentiating for kids, and having that autonomy to do that as long as they're getting to the standards. And I think that's really served us. So that's a nice way that technology and PD really go hand in hand. That's not really about tech PD, but it's more about what's helped us kind of move on to this platform, I think more successfully and quicker than we could have anticipated.
Can I follow up on that technology piece? Sometimes it's the unknown. So I can tell you, yeah, Zoom's working fine. I have hiccups because of my internet connection, but sometimes we don't know about different opportunities. So, for example, colleges that do online learning, they have more robust programs than the patchwork of Google Classroom and Zoom. Is there something that Google is starting to do that is more robust? It's more about looking at opportunities and advancement. I know this is way outside the scope of this conversation, so I'll let it go, but I sometimes worry that families don't really know enough to give us feedback if we're not providing them with more advanced information.
Yeah, I think to your point of, thinking longer term, as we recognize this may be a state we go in and out of. Certainly over the summer, I think we will be able to make some more plans that really do that longer term piece. But the truth is we're not going to look like those people at all right now because we didn't plan for that. So, colleges took years setting
That's
up those
22.
plan forms and getting ready, right? So and we're all in that situation. And I think that's what everybody's been talking about with the patients. And that is just recognizing that every day we should just expect there's going to be hiccups and things we didn't know and new things. It's both scary and kind of invigorating at the same time because we're learning a lot more as we go. So I think that would be just part of the norm that we have to expect at this point.
Can I
Wait a minute, Karen, did you have something next?
No, I was just looking something up. Sorry, I think my thing is still.
May I? So I like where Zena was going, I think, and one of the, at least as far as we're talking about technology, and I would like to encourage you, we've lent out a lot of Chromebooks and hotspots, and a lot of that goes back to Wi-Fi's generous Powered Up campaign. I think we should expect over the course of being used 24 hours a day in people's houses that a lot of those devices aren't going to be the same, and in fact may never be the same, and we may need to replace them. And I think that with the money that we were going to use to hire a tech director, I think we should be seriously looking at a replacement now, especially if budgets are getting tighter. We might find in future budgets we don't have the technology budget that we have that we would need to keep our replacement schedule, and our replacement schedule just got moved up way sooner. So I would encourage you to look through your inventory and say, we've lent out X number of Chromebooks. We're going to expect that a third of them aren't going to be functional when they come back. So we should be using some of the tech director money to buy that many Chromebooks. And I apologize, Ian, if that wasn't, but I think technology, that's sort of the same discussion, maybe not the same details. So
That's exactly where I was going. It's part of the broader point I was making. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
I would agree with Brian and Zena as well, and as much to say also, much like hand sanitizer and toilet paper have become difficult to acquire, I imagine that Chromebooks are also going to have a backlog of, as you mentioned, Judy, it's a problem across the entire country, so people are going to be looking at providing those for students. So the sooner we could get in line to replace some of those so that we have them when we need them as well might be something to consider. Good.
So Michelle, can I chime in with my second FY20 question?
Yep.
So question / observation. We had, I think at a previous meeting, we had voted, because we have to by law, we've got to be reviewing warrants and approving them at least once a month. So we've given the chair that authorization to do so. Ellen, I think, had described at a previous meeting, we might be in a position to be paying one of our contractors some sort of reduced rate to kind of have them available, especially if we come back online before the end of the school year. Judy, you had mentioned, I think at the beginning of the meeting, we've reached out to our school committee council on a number of issues. And so to knit this together, one of the things I have in my mind is I certainly want to keep whole all of our district employees. So that's teachers, it's ESPs, and it's administratives. All the people that are literally on our payroll are kind of a first priority for me. And then I look for some way to think about the various contracted services that we have outside the district and understand that there are a variety of, whether it's through the PPP, there's some programs out there to keep those folks whole as well. So to the extent that I think Ellen typically prepares warrants, whereas this kind of stuff is segregated out. So we typically have like payroll warrants and we have contractor warrants, makes it easy to review. I have no problem paying for services rendered, but given that the clock is ticking, I have some questions about how you are and how we should be thinking about are we getting invoices from contractors for services not rendered? And what are our obligations under contract? And is that something that school committee council can help us understand? Are there compromises to be made? Do we have contractors who are asking us for money even though we're not getting services? And is that happening in more than one instance? And how do we begin to put priority towards that, given the conversation we had much earlier, right, which is about taking FY20 resources and trying to find ways to allocate them towards 21 needs? So it's still very much a question in my mind. I wonder if maybe you or Ellen could speak to that.
Sure, and I'll invite Ellen to jump in. Our capacity and willingness to continue to pay contracted services, sort of to keep people available to restart at a moment's notice, will change if the governor announces that we're closed for the year. So the DESE is going to continue to give us guidelines on how to, what categories of employees and or contracted services should be maintained. What I can tell you is our out-of-district transportation contract has been negotiated considerably lower during the closure, and so that may change again if we're closed for the rest of the school year. And so, but there are some categories of contract employees who are providing special education services, for example, that will have to continue to maintain. So I think it varies by contract. And should we extend the closure into the fall, some of our regular contracts for things that we're not using, say maintenance or clicks on the copiers or something like that, we would have to renegotiate as well. So there are all kinds of categories of contract services. There are also some categories that will probably go up as things have lain dormant and need to be maintained in a different way than if they were regularly used and maintained. And so I think it's going to be complicated. What I would say is we will continue to consult with legal counsel, continue to consult with the state. Ellen has multiple conferences per week with the DESE, particularly around accounting recommendations. So Ellen, is there anything that I've forgotten to say around contracted services?
No. So you did touch upon that we receive our special education transportation through SEAM Collaborative, as we remember. So they have renegotiated the transportation contract during the closing to a reduced rate. We have not done any additional negotiations with North Suburban. I'm waiting for additional guidance through DESE, through the Department of Revenue, regarding how language regarding this should be handled. And we have received guidance from DESE, as well as Department of Revenue has approved the continuation of payment to collaboratives, as well as vocational schools, the full amount of tuitions during the closure, because they are seen as extensions of our school district. I am still waiting for additional guidance from DESE on private placements that fall under the OSD rates.
So we'll keep an eye on it, Chris, and we'll keep you updated. I think it really, things could change drastically if we're closed for the remainder of the year.
And can Ellen just confirm for us, do we pay contractor invoices? Do we pay net 15 or net 30, Ellen?
Typically, we are in the practice of net 30.
Okay, thank you.
And in some cases, Chris, to be very honest, depending on when the contractor gets us their invoice and we actually process it, it can be longer than that. But I can assure you that North Suburban has been paid through the very last day that school was in session, that we are not holding any additional invoices for services that have been rendered and received to our satisfaction.
Okay, thank you.
Have we paid North Suburban anything since we've been out of school either? You said we've paid them for the day we were out of school. Have we continued to pay them at all, or is that?
No. Okay, so Michelle, to clarify, we have paid them through the last day that school was in session, which was Thursday, March 12th. We have not provided them with any additional yellow bus payments since then. I am waiting for rulings from Department of Revenue regarding the payment of school buses, and waiting for a little bit more guidance just in general regarding the yellow school buses.
And otherwise, our warrants, our salaries, our contracts are all just for our district staff. We're still being paid on the regular schedule.
Correct. So all district employees, we run 2 warrants every week. One is an accounts payable warrant, which has all of the invoices for services rendered. And then the other one is a payroll warrant for all school department employees paid through a paycheck. And to Chris's point, those 2 are always separate warrants.
Any other questions? We're still on FY20. Okay. Then the next item on our agenda would be.
Sorry, can I just remembered something.
Go ahead.
Jump in. Judy, I heard that the preschool students, because we're going to be talking about their fees and stuff, I heard that they were still participating with Zoom with their preschool teachers. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. So when we discuss the preschool tuition, that's a consideration of, instead of the entire amount, maybe a percentage returned or whatnot, because they are still participating in education.
Yes, 100%.
And Judy, I'm going to anticipate that this discussion is going to get a little more clarity when we know whether we're coming back or not. So we may, we had a tentative school committee meeting. I know we'll get to it at the end, but I'm just going to mention it now. We had a tentative meeting on the agenda for next week, and we may in fact need that meeting. If we have to be around closed.
Yeah, I mean, we can. I don't know that we'll have a lot of information between now and then. That's going to be helpful around financials. Really, if we close, it's more longer term planning and not an immediate need. If we close for the remainder of the year, it's really about longer term planning, and that's going to take a little longer than the next few days. So, and we won't have information until Friday at the earliest from DESE, and so I would propose pushing that out another week, but let's see where we land today at noon with the governor's announcement.
Right. Okay. So that would bring us to the action items. That's the approval of our minutes from March 17th, 23rd, 31st, and April 7th. You should have also seen some edited copies of those. If everybody's comfortable, if somebody wants to make a motion about approval of those minutes, unless there's anything else people have questions on.
Were the edited copies in the packet? I think I just clicked on the link and read what it led me to.
Likewise.
I don't know that I've seen any edited minutes.
Karen?
So I think that what Frida sent out last Friday was the final copy.
Okay.
Yep.
That included all. Yeah.
So in other words, if we click the link like now in the agenda, it goes to the latest edition of the minutes. Is that right, Frida?
I can take a look. Just a second.
The only change was the April 7th minutes had Jerry Nardone's name spelled incorrectly.
Oh.
Yeah.
The only change that remained the name spelling.
And that has not been changed. I see it still is listed incorrectly, but that's.
Yeah, I think I mentioned that at like 7:15 this morning.
Yes.
Oh, I've done a change.
So I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't see April 7th.
Okay, I
minutes.
thought I changed it.
Yeah, no, I didn't say that.
So Christine, your question, what you received in the packet was the edited copy, except for Jerry's name.
So would you like a motion to approve the March 17th, 23rd, 31st, and April 7th minutes as presented, with the exception of any additional typos only that may be discovered to be corrected with Frida?
Second.
I'll vote. Roll call. Aye.
All in favor. And we'll take.
Aye.
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 Aye. And that brings us to the chair report. I think I mentioned earlier that Brian and I will continue to meet with finance and the select board and the town manager and Dr. Evans and Ellen about the budget, and try to provide regular reports to the school committee on that as necessary and as things change, so that we can keep on top of that, as clearly that is going to be a changing target for us as we move forward. Zena will continue to work with Lori and Dr. Evans on the contracts as those need to be changed, particularly in light of May 4th approaching, and then we'll be able to bring those back to us if they're, particularly if we need to make any significant changes with a longer school year closure. Chris, I hear is going to be working with Dr. Evans, it sounds like, through your offer to try to flesh out that Lynch timeline a little more. Karen, did you have anything else to report on any, have you been in touch with any community organizations or any partners that you needed to report on?
No, I haven't heard anything.
Okay. I do know that WIFI has had to make some changes to their fundraising model because the Town Day Road Race will obviously will not be able to be held this year. So I know they're looking for some solutions moving forward about their efforts and how to support the schools and the community as well. I think that is about all for me. Dr. Evans, did you have anything else? And just to continue to thank the staff, the teachers, and the administration for their ongoing efforts to support our kids and families, both academically and social emotionally. I can't for the things that I've seen come out from the specialists and our other members of staff, our ESPs that are providing support in all kinds of ways to our families, and that the flexibility and just the sheer enthusiasm with which they are embracing it, considering the circumstances, has just been remarkable to see. Dr. Evans, anything else to report?
No, I think I reported at the start of the meeting on the distance learning plan, so I think I'm all set for now.
Our future agenda items are the 2020 handbooks. We have a school choice hearing and vote right now. We have that scheduled for the last possible day that we can potentially schedule it, with the hopes of being able to do some kind of distance in-person hearing for that. Obviously, that's going to rely on what the social distancing measures coming out from the state are. If we need to schedule that remotely, we're hoping to understand a little bit better from the state and from MASC about how to successfully hold those hearings via remote vote. We thought that putting it out as late as possible would give us the opportunity to do that, since it just needs to be done by a certain date. Doing it early doesn't really advantage us in any way at this point. We're going to have a discussion about FY21 fees, and I would also add probably also any FY20 fees, depending on also what happens with the May 4th date. We still have Morocco capital plan out there. Are there any other agenda items that people do not see listed on here that you would like to hear from?
I have two suggestions, Michelle. I think it would be helpful to have the Lynch project as a standing item for future agenda items, just as a check-in. Perhaps at the next meeting, we'll have that deliverables document to talk about, but I think given the conversations that Dr. Evans and Ellen are having with MSBA, it'd just be helpful to have it on the agenda. If we may take 2 minutes, we may take 10. And then I also wanted to suggest, I think it would be helpful if we add school committee reports as an agenda item, given how you've given us all some assignments. There may be an opportunity for us to check in. And then on that note, I just want to make the committee aware that while a lot of our boards and commissions are doing a lot of great work remotely via Zoom, we've actually not had a capital planning committee meeting in the midst of COVID-19. So that's something I'm working on with the chair and with Town Hall, because there's some issues I think now for capital to discuss. So that I may have something to share at our next meeting, depending upon when we're able to meet. I just want to make you aware of that we've not been meeting, not having had any discussions.
Okay. we will add those. Those are two good suggestions. Does anyone else have anything else that we, Dr. Evans, the only other thing that I might suggest, I see the 2020, 2021 handbooks on here. I also wonder if Mr. Lynn and Mr. Mahoney would like to also come in and sort of talk to us a little bit about maybe transitions and how that might be changing for some of our kids, given the distance learning. That might be something for a future agenda as well, because I'm sure that we have some questions about that, and they I'm sure have been thinking about lots of those things.
Sure, happy to do it.
Anything else? Yep.
Not necessarily get ahead of ourselves, but because you haven't talked about next meeting dates, but we will need to be approving contract language, and I doubt, even if we know what's happening, that we would know by April 28th. So I'm just thinking offhand whether we want a placeholder meeting for the Friday, because the contract language expires on that Friday of, I'm trying to find my calendar, but I think it's May 1st, and we would need to approve something, ideally, especially if we had an extended closure, we would want to vote it before it started as opposed to after it. So I'm just wondering if we want to have that on the agenda at some point. The 28th is probably too soon, so maybe May 1st, but just for something you to think about.
Well, so Brian, are you suggesting that we move the meeting on the 20th to the end of the week?
I guess I would ask Zena and Lori if they anticipate that by the end of the week they would have that ready. I mean, if they said they had it by the 28th, then we'd be like, we could do it then. But I imagined it would take longer. It doesn't sound like it's going to be necessarily a simple process, so I would think it would have to be at the end of the week for it to work time-wise. But I would leave that in the hands of others who are closer to that than I am.
Yeah, I think the more we can push it out, the better. That'll allow the process to play itself out.
But am I correct? It would have to, ideally, it would happen before the 4th if we were extending that. So like the 1st.
So we'd have it all ready to, yeah. So Anna and Zena, we're in the process of talking, certainly. But I mean, we could have it that Tuesday, more likely a Wednesday of that week, I'm thinking, just because it just does take a little time and they have to ratify and on their end as well.
Exactly. So Michelle, I think I would be suggesting that maybe that date be moved to Thursday or Friday, and then that would be an agenda item that maybe it's the sole agenda item, I don't know, but it would be an agenda item for that meeting.
And the school committee typically looks at Thursdays as our backups. That certainly works better for me than the Friday. So April 30th, I think, would certainly be easy for me to swing.
Are members and staff preferring morning or evening? Is that an easy question on here, or should I take a poll?
Evening.
Evening.
All the same. I got nowhere to go. All day to get there.
I never know when the phone rings and it's Mass General and who's running out of my house in a COVID suit. So who knows? I'm flexible.
Well, it was an evening meeting, so why don't we leave it on the evening of April 30th then? Or we'll put our placeholder meeting, and that way Frida can get notification to Mary Ellen at Town Hall for a scheduled meeting, so that it's easier to cancel, I feel like, than to try to rush to put one on the agenda. So let's just move that Tuesday meeting to Thursday evening, and we'll hold that as a placeholder. That sounds acceptable.
Good. And Michelle, I failed to say earlier, I really like the idea about finding a way to follow social distancing and have that public hearing in person for school choice. If there's a way to make that happen, maybe at the high school auditorium or something, I think that's a good plan, at least to aspire to do that right now.
Thank you. Okay, everybody stay safe and sane, and good luck with your Zoom calls.
Thank you very much.
Adjourn.
Soon.
Bye,
Second.
Jason.
You got adjourn.
Bye.
Bye.
Second.
Aye.
And by the way, we were live on WinCam, Michelle, so easy for you to circle back with them.
Yeah, second half they popped in.
Yeah.
We need a roll call.
Aye.
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 See y'all later.